I sold my condo, drained my retirement fund, and gave up every dollar I'd saved just to keep our family vineyard alive. 14 months later, when the land was finally back on its feet, when the grapes were full and harvest was ready, they handed the CEO title to my sister. No vote, no discussion, just a toast at dinner where my father clinked glasses and said, "Let's all support Emma as she steps into leadership." Emma? The one who hadn't touched a vine in a decade. The one who called our grapes brandable but couldn't tell you when to prune them. The one who showed up after the crisis was over and took the crown. And me? I was offered a technical advisor title. No control, no equity, no say. They told me I was too involved in the day-to-day to see the big picture, that I should be proud just to have helped. But here's the thing. I didn't help. I saved it. And they thought I'd quietly keep pruning vines while my sister signed deals and polished heels? What would you do if your own family used your sacrifice as a stepping stone, then pushed you off it once the climb was done? Would you stay? Would you swallow it? Or would you step back and build something even they couldn't touch? Because what happened next? Let's just say they thought they could bury me in the soil. They forgot I knew how to grow things. My name's not on the gate of the vineyard. It's Jennings Estate, named after my great-grandfather, passed down through 3 generations of winemakers, dreamers, and stubborn hearts. But I was the one who saved it. Not when it was thriving, but when it was on the edge of being swallowed whole by drought, debt, and disappointment. I wasn't always here. I had a stable life in San Diego, worked in logistics for a regional grocery chain, had a modest condo, a good 401k, and enough savings to feel safe. But then came the call. Dad had fallen. Mom sounded scared. The vineyard had missed 2 payments on the new fermentation tanks. The frost last season wiped out nearly half the harvest. "We'll lose everything," she whispered. I didn't hesitate. I requested unpaid leave, packed up my car, and drove 12 hours north with nothing but a duffel bag and my financial safety net. Oh, Emma didn't come. She was in Italy, networking with wine bloggers and lifestyle influencers. At least that's what her Instagram said. To be fair, Emma had always been the glamorous one, younger than me by 8 years. Sharp, stylish, great at smiling with her eyes. She had a degree in international marketing and a resume full of short-term roles with flashy titles, like brand elevation consultant. She was good with buzzwords, not so much with dirt. While I was walking rows at 6 a.m., checking for powdery mildew, she was reposting photos of Chianti and charcuterie boards. Still, I didn't complain. I didn't ask where she was, because the work needed to be done. I met with suppliers, renegotiated payment terms. I reviewed our books line by line and found $47. $9 worth of recurring costs that could be trimmed or paused. I called our 3 biggest buyers and promised them consistency, even if I had to bottle the wine myself. I slept in my childhood bedroom on an air mattress because the guest rooms were filled with old equipment and invoices. I ate lunch standing, drank more black coffee than water, and I slowly, carefully, brought the vineyard back to life. It wasn't sexy, but it was sacred, and it was ours. Vineyards. Mom would make soft comments like, "You've really stepped up," and "Your father's proud, even if he doesn't say it." Dad stayed mostly quiet. He'd shuffle out to the fields in the morning with his cane, say things like, "You missed a spot," or "We used to harvest faster than this." That was his love language, correction. I didn't expect praise, just respect. And for a while, I thought I had it, until Emma showed up. She flew in 2 months after the bank loan was secured, and the vines began to recover. She brought lavender business cards, talked about storytelling through label design and capturing new audiences. She never asked how the frost damage had been mitigated. She never touched the soil, but she hugged our parents, called them my sweet heroes, and somehow, that was enough. She didn't see what I saw, that the vineyard wasn't just a brand, It was an organism, one that needed more than aesthetics, one that needed grit, hands, patience, and yes, sacrifice. But she did know one thing: how to take up space when the cameras were back on. So when they gathered us for dinner that night and raised a glass to the next generation of leadership, I should have known. I should have seen it coming. Dinner was supposed to be celebratory. Harvest had gone well. The vines were healthy. We had 3 new restaurant contracts lined up, thanks to relationships I'd spent months nurturing. Mom brought out the good china. Dad even wore the wine-stained polo Emma had gifted him from her last European trip. Emma sat at the head of the table. That was my first clue. I was pouring the Pinot when Dad cleared his throat and said, "We've decided it's time for the next generation to officially lead the Jennings brand." I stopped mid-pour. He continued, "Emma has the vision, the network, the charisma to take us where we need to go." Mom chimed in gently. "And you, sweetheart, you've been so incredible on the ground. We see you more as our operations anchor. Emma will handle strategy and growth." I looked at Emma. She smiled, lifted her glass, and said, "To family and the future." There it was, a crown I'd earned, placed on someone else's head, in front of me, without warning. I didn't speak much the rest of the evening. I nodded, forced a smile, and helped clear the plates. Then I went out back, sat on the old bench behind the fermentation shed, and stared into the dark rows of vines I'd saved. The wind was cold, but my face was burning. 14 months of back-breaking work, my entire savings, a resume that was now in shambles, and they gave the title, The Power, to the one who showed up after the danger had passed. They said it was about vision, but what they meant was, Emma looks better on paper. Emma makes the family sound modern. And me? I was just the one who kept the lights on. Duh, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. Instead, I opened my laptop and I started rereading contracts because while they were busy toasting Emma's future, they had forgotten something. Legally, I was still the one who owned 60% of the vineyard's debt. That refinancing deal I secured with the regional agriculture bank, it was in my name because Mom and Dad's credit was too shaky, and Emma hadn't been around. They'd needed me, not just physically, but financially. And I had collateralized part of my own retirement account to secure it. I was, quite literally, the reason the vineyard existed today. So no, I wasn't going to wage war, but I was going to protect what I built. The next morning, I met with James, the lawyer who'd helped draft our first vendor renewal agreements. I asked him to review every document I'd signed, every dotted line I'd committed to. Then I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to fight for the crown. I was going to build a new seat at the table, one they couldn't remove. Ooh. My first move? I filed paperwork to form Jennings Reserve LLC, a new division, separate from the main brand, focused on small batch, heritage wine, fermented using my grandfather's original techniques, aged longer, labeled minimally. I had already been experimenting with it in the far field, an acre Dad called the stubborn land. Turns out, that acre produced grapes with intense character when you treated it right. No irrigation, no shortcuts, just time, patience, and care. It was my metaphor, and now it would be my signature. Second move? I sent a gentle email to our European distribution partner, the one I had landed through 6 months of translation, negotiation, and sampling. I informed them that, per clause 7B of our agreement, the partnership rested on quality control under my supervision, and if that supervision was no longer active, they had the right to pause the relationship. I didn't threaten. I simply clarified. They replied within 48 hours. If Emma is leading production, we will be suspending the next order until further notice. We remain interested in your boutique line. Please keep us posted. I did, quietly, steadily, and I began bottling the first vintage of Jennings Reserve, Diwa. They thought naming Emma CEO would make me disappear. What they didn't realize was that I had already started building something they couldn't touch. Emma wasted no time rebranding the vineyard. Within 3 weeks of being named CEO, she hired a marketing agency out of LA, people who had never stepped foot on a farm. They brought in flashy mood boards, words like experiential, artisanal chic, and luxury disruptor. They scrapped our handwritten labels, replaced them with gold-foiled logos, embossed corks, and a slogan I nearly choked on: tradition, reimagined. Tradition wasn't something to be reimagined. It was something you carried with reverence, and if you didn't understand it, you had no business profiting from it. Emma called a team meeting, told us we were moving into modern positioning, that we were eliminating our 2 oldest blends because they didn't match the new vibe. She spoke like a woman who'd read about vineyards in a magazine, not someone who'd buried her hands in the soil. Worse, she fired Miguel, who'd worked our land since I was in high school, who saved half the vines during the 2016 frost by hauling blankets out at 2 a.m. She said his communication style wasn't aligned with the brand. He barely speaks English, but he knew grapes better than any of us. That was my breaking point, but I didn't confront her. I got quiet, and then I got busy. Vincent, Jennings Reserve. My small batch label. Launched softly. No announcement. No big event. Just 12 cases sent directly to a curated list of sommeliers, restaurant buyers, and 2 online reviewers who specialized in family-grown vineyards. Each bottle came with a handwritten card, crafted with the methods passed down to me. May it taste like memory? It wasn't a mass campaign. It was a whisper, but the whisper traveled. 2 weeks later, a food columnist in Napa included Jennings Reserve in her top 5 wines to watch in 2025. She called it startlingly grounded, defiantly traditional, like someone remembered what wine is supposed to taste like. Emma tried to take credit. She went on Instagram Live saying, "We're exploring experimental blends under the family's innovation arm. Except Jennings Reserve wasn't under the family's umbrella. It was mine, legally, financially, and spiritually." And people noticed. The European buyer reached out again. They wanted to carry Jennings Reserve exclusively, a boutique offering, no corporate branding, just integrity. I said yes. And then came the investor call. Apparently, a regional venture group had been eyeing the vineyard for potential expansion. They loved the Jennings name, but not the drama. After sampling both Emma's new vintage and mine, they asked a simple question: who actually makes the wine we tasted in the article? When they found out it was me and that the vineyard was no longer under my supervision, they pulled their offer. Emma was livid. She stormed into my workspace, my quiet processing shed by the eastern slope, and slammed the door. "You're sabotaging this family." I didn't even look up. "I'm protecting what I built." She hissed something about me being bitter, jealous, clinging to the past. "You don't get it." "Do you?" I said. "This vineyard didn't need reinvention. It needed preservation. And while you were posing for promo shots, I was in the rows, saving our future." The next day, Dad called me into his study. He sat quietly, holding a bottle of Jennings Reserve. "This tastes like your grandfather's wine." I nodded. He sighed. "I didn't think you wanted the title." "I didn't." I said, "I wanted the truth. And maybe some respect." He didn't argue. He just looked tired. "Remember the stubborn land out by the eastern hill? It was mine. Quietly deeded over when I refinanced the debt in my name. The lawyer had advised I take collateral, just in case. I never told them. But now, Jennings Reserve wasn't just an idea. It was rooted, legally and literally, in land Emma couldn't touch. And the vines, they were thriving, because I knew when to prune and when to let things go. Emma tried to turn the vineyard into a brand. I turned it into a legacy. And soon, even she would have to admit, you can't market your way around the truth. Emma thought she could spin anything. She had the charm, the pitch deck polish, the confidence of someone who'd never had to beg a supplier to extend credit by 10 days just to make payroll. But charm doesn't keep grapes alive in a drought. And Polish doesn't mean a thing when customers start returning bottles, because that's what started happening. One by one, restaurants quietly dropped the new labels. They cited inconsistencies in taste and loss of depth. A few even told me privately, it just doesn't feel honest anymore. Then came the online reviews. A wine blogger with a modest but loyal following wrote, "Jennings used to feel like sipping history. Now it tastes like a marketing meeting." Emma panicked. She sent out samples of a rushed new vintage. She threw a relaunch event in the city. She hired influencers. And still, Jennings Reserve continued to sell out. Every single case. Also, then came the final blow. A journalist from a regional food and wine publication requested a feature on the family behind Jennings Reserve. Emma assumed it was about her. She scheduled the interview, prepared a media kit, even rehearsed lines. But when the journalist arrived at the vineyard and asked, "Where's the woman who actually makes the wine?" Emma froze, because by then, people knew. They knew the story. About the older sister who came back when things were falling apart, who used her retirement savings to save the land, who never asked for a title, just to be seen. A week later, the article dropped. It was called "The Sister Who Stayed," how one woman quietly saved a vineyard and reclaimed her name. It was everywhere. The article didn't attack Emma. It didn't need to. It simply told the truth, with dates, with names, with photos, me, in boots and a sun hat, pruning vines at sunrise. The final paragraph read, "Sometimes, legacy isn't about who speaks loudest, but who shows up when it matters." Emma called. First time in months. Her voice was thin. "I think we need to talk." I met her at the old processing shed. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just deflated. "They're saying I'm a fraud," she whispered. I didn't argue. "You were given the stage. I just chose not to sit in the audience." She asked if I'd consider returning to the family brand. I smiled. "Emma, I never left the family. I just stopped waiting for permission to lead." And then I handed her a folder. Inside was a proposal to purchase the vineyard outright, with investors, with cash, with full operational control, and a generous clause. They could stay on the land, live here, retain memories. But I would no longer share the title, CEO or otherwise. It took a few weeks, some lawyers, a few tough calls. But in the end, they signed. And just like that, the place I had once saved finally belonged to me, not by inheritance, but by intention, not by bloodline, but by proof. The land that was once collateral for a dying business was now the foundation of a thriving one. Jennings Reserve expanded to include an apprenticeship program for women over 40 re-entering the workforce, those who'd been told they were too late, too old, or too behind. We taught fermentation, finance, and how to own your name, on paper and in practice. They tried to write me out of the story. I rewrote the ending. And this time, my name was on the bottle. The vineyard still smells the same in the morning. Earthy, sweet, a little stubborn. But something in me has changed. I don't walk the rows wondering if I'll be noticed. I walk them knowing they remember. Every vine, every scar, every rebirth. They know who showed up when the rain didn't. And I think that's the difference between recognition and rootedness. Recognition fades. Rootedness holds you steady when people forget, when roles shift, when titles are handed out like party favors. Some mornings, I still catch my breath. When I walk past the shed that used to be held together with hope and duct tape, now upgraded and humming with life. When I see my name on invoices, on labels, on the door. Not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. With grit, with late nights, with quiet no's and quieter yeses. There's something sacred about building your own seat, After being told to stand in the corner, there's a freedom in letting go of needing them to say thank you, because the land says it for them. Every harvest is proof. Mom still calls. She asks how things are going. Sometimes asks for a bottle to share at bridge night. Dad doesn't say much, but one day, he handed me his old journal, the one with planting notes and rainfall records going back 20 years. He said, "It's time someone who understands the weight carries the pen." That was his version of an apology, and I accepted it. Not because I needed closure, but because I finally didn't. Emma moved on. She started a wine blog, interviews women in the industry, occasionally shares my product with a tasteful caption. We're not close, but we're not at war either, and that, in itself, is peace. I still get letters from women across the country, some who lost their positions in family businesses, some who were cut out of promotions after years of loyalty, some who stayed silent, smiling, while their brothers or husbands were handed the seat they built. And to them I say, you are not dramatic. You are not bitter. You are not overreacting. You are witnessing the truth. And you don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to start building, even if it's small, even if it's just a patch of land behind someone else's mansion. Start. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is grow something no one can take from you. What? Has your work ever been claimed by someone who only showed up when it was convenient? Have you ever built something only to watch someone else get credit and still chose to rise? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you've ever had to reclaim what was yours without burning down the whole house to do it. And if this story stirred something inside you, subscribe, because here we don't tell stories about revenge. We tell stories about returning to yourself. And the next one? Well, my parents lied about our flight date, so I'd miss the family trip to Hawaii. But when they got back, I was already gone. And what they found waiting for them was the surprise of a lifetime.